pump.
Yes,
Everything's rolling.
It's a lot less pressure when you can say, oh, I don't want to be sorry.
Yeah. So let's keep the warmth, but just have a little bit of detail on the history. How did the forum come together?
Billy, come on, you know where everything's kept.
You know, when we think about the history of the forum, you know, the forum's been around for nearly half a century. That's a long time. You know, maybe a few, not quite half a century, but quite there. And you know, the history is always the history of the forum being established was grassroots, wasn't it? It was the community leaders and the community groups and the community organisations across Greater Western Sydney that really wanted to establish a people organisation.
That's what they do. And I think the types of organisations, you know, that are our members are organisers by virtue of the work they do. So it was natural that they wanted to come together, I think.
Yeah.
And how did all of you become associated with the forum?
All of us, I think, were co-opted, but we're willing volunteers. For me, it was just colleagues around Western Sydney saying, is this something you should be involved in? And the minute you get a taste for it and you see the conviction, not just in board members, but really importantly in the staff, you think, yes, this is something I want to be a part of. But the other thing is that all of the work that the forum does is incredibly urgent and incredibly important. And if the forum wasn't there, the voices that we need to promote wouldn't be heard, you know, to an extent. So I think it's really important work, so it's easy to be involved.
If I might just acknowledge country, pay our respects to elders. It's always a privilege and honour to be on Darug country. I think the West is the heart of a lot of this movement and conversations and shaping space. Darug elders, Darug women particularly have done an incredible job making sure that it always comes down to the voices from the ground up, because they do caretaking on such a sophisticated and advanced way. And I find that Western Sydney Community Forum does that in a beautiful way also, because they listen to people on the ground and they want to make sure that it doesn't get diluted, chopped up, reframed and retold. They want to be able to preserve that narrative as authentically as possible, honouring the storyteller, honouring people's experiences. I mean, this was super evident during the COVID period where when everybody was hitting back, going, oh damn, I've got to look after my viability, my job, my position. You know, Western Sydney Community Forum went, what does community need right now? You know, leadership meant going on vulnerable as well, but you know what? Let's be vulnerable together. What does that mean? What does that look like? Let's co-design that space together, and I think that's something that's quite unique to this organisation.
I became involved because I saw a way in which staff who reported to me were doing the training, and they found that such a great thing. And that's when I first started to hear about the forum, and I could see what it was doing. And then I took a greater interest and attended some of the functions, and then had an interest and desire to be on the board to contribute in that way. And I thought it was a natural fit from what I was doing in the community and the organisation I was with in the community, what they were doing, to be involved in the forum, to give more in terms of on the board and to meet other people from other organisations. And I think that's one of the great things about being on the board, is meeting people from other organisations that are quite different and yet are the same in the sense of a commitment to the best for people in Western Sydney and for the best in not-for-profits and community service organisations across Western Sydney. So it's really great to meet as a board and then to meet with other organisations that are part of the forum on those other occasions when we meet. So they're the things that keep me involved and wanting to be contribute and because I feel like I gain a lot. As much as I'm able to contribute, I'm also gaining a lot from the influences from the people I meet and the people I sit with around the board and then the other organisations.
So let's segue into anti-racism and the board's focus, the organisation's focus on anti-racism from about 2020 and then the escalation through 2021. So how did that all come about, anti-racism as a focus?
I guess I brought it to the board's attention at one of our meetings because I felt like, yes, we do a lot of anti-racism work anyway, but how do we actually formalise that journey? Who do we identify as people that need to be in the room? How do we make sure that everyone's voices are captured? I mean, I come from a local government background myself, and I was hell-bent on making sure that it wasn't a 12-month strategy or plan that was produced, and I knew this was the right group to be able to pose that to. I can't say enough about, putting an issue like that up and having, our chair say, yep, this is something we need to address, not having another barrier and then another barrier and then another barrier, which, I'm 51 now, almost Monday, and I've been through enough barriers, and that's exhausting, and there were many points at that journey where you want to give up because it's so exhausting and damaging. But to have somebody say to you, yep, okay, we're going to do that, no barriers in the way, let's get on with what needs to get done. That is a gift and it's a treasure, and it demonstrates what it means to surrender privilege, to say, you know what, who are the experts or people with lived experience in the room, and we give that mic over. You don't experience a lot of that often, and when you do, you hold on to it for dear life and you honour it with every step you take, with every engagement you take. And for me, I knew that saying that First Nations mob had to lead this conversation. It wasn't myself as a person of colour. It had to be a First Nations narrative because that's who I need to follow. To have that honour was just magnificent because we understood that they were the holders of this process, that they were going to lead us with such care and such respect, and to demonstrate to everybody how that's going to get done. And we were very aware that, with COVID around, it wasn't going to be an easy process getting Uncle Greg, Auntie Carol, who have been so, patient with us. We couldn't always access them. They couldn't always be available, that they're older people. Sometimes health issues become an issue, transportation, use of technology. Those sort of things are things that are going to be a part of the process, but it's up to us to make sure it's inclusive. We sometimes have to take a couple of steps back. We have to make sure that we're in deep listen. We don't jump to judgment. Sometimes Uncle Greg tells you a story around a river, over a mountain, down a valley, and then gets to the punchline. You're like, oh, I get it now. Because sometimes that's how stories are told. Sometimes we just go, oh, okay, let's listen. And then when you hear what he has to say, oh my God, it's so magical. Because he tells your story where it connects to our hearts. And, that's been, I think, the best part of the process.
Look, I think we were really fortunate to have a champion in Khan coming onto the board, and I think really encouraging us all to look at this issue and to be great listeners, if anything, and to be humble in our listening. That's been one of the best and most refreshing exercises I think we've engaged in as a board. And we take stances and we take positions on a lot of things in the interest of our community, in the interest of Western Sydney. But I'm really hard pushed to think of something that has generated so much positive momentum, and it is about listening. Some of the most affecting, I think, gatherings we've had are when we've been in the presence of our First Nations representatives and our elders, who really totally make you reconfigure the way you look at our region and the millennia, the time, the kind of eons across which this knowledge stretches. So we're incredibly fortunate to have that, and I think that's been one of the brilliant things that's come through this process. The other thing is this is Western Sydney. Yeah. So as the most culturally diverse region in the country, we are dead set about making sure that narrative is flipped from negative to positive. It's the greatest asset we have, our cultural diversity. Regardless even of the forum, I think as people who are interested in Western Sydney, we need to promote this thing as our greatest asset, our diversity.
Yeah.
So that's been a natural place to inhabit.
Yeah.
But I'm hard pressed to think of a time where I've learnt so much over such a short time frame. We've been at this for around about a year now. And I've been totally, I think, questioning my own position, of course, coming from a position of white male privilege as well. You've got to shut up sometimes and listen. It's very hard for someone in a role like on a board, where you are in a leadership role. Sometimes you just got to shut up and learn and listen, and that's been a really refreshing thing to do. Says the guy who's talking. But it's so important, and it is fundamental to the identity of Western Sydney that we not only celebrate this diversity, but as I said, we promote it as an asset because it is, and other regions want what we have. It's a wonderful treasure.
And I think, and I think you're right that it's there embedded within Western Sydney. There's also a lot of racism embedded in Western Sydney as well, and so we're dealing with both that very multicultural, cross-cultural place. Very large proportion of the population of First Nations people and people who've come from all over the world, and a lot of white people, and dealing with all of those sorts of things in that kind of melting pot. And I think my sense is that a lot of our organisations, in the sense of represented by our membership on the board, are also express that diversity and also looking to actually do something. Because it's so important on so many different levels in terms of confronting the issues of racism. It goes to what we're trying to achieve as organisations. If we're wanting to actually do the best for people in Western Sydney, then we can't do that if we're actually excluding people through our language and our behaviours. And at the same, so I think when it came up at the board, there was that impetus from Turkan, and there's also there was a ready acceptance that this is what we want to do. And at the same time, there's people like me who are white, and I was born in Western Sydney and lived here for 40 out of my 60-something years. But it's a lifelong journey of dealing with racism, and one course doesn't do it. And it's a constant work of recognising that and learning bits along the way, and there are kind of peaks, and we learn a lot or say something and go away and think, oh, that I've got to do something about that. I actually didn't know I had that attitude or that behaviour, and so there's a whole lot of self-reflection, and it's a constant journey. And so what we've done with the anti-racism course, which I guess could be flipped on its head as a way of social inclusion, because it's actually about how do we include people and how do we stop excluding people by all that stuff. It was a moment of deep learning and confronting as one among many across the journey of one's life, and it's a really important one, and I think it signals for us. We as a board, we're committed to this, and we're wanting to say to the organisations of Western Sydney, this is really important. This is probably one of the most important things in terms of what we do going ahead. This because this is how we actually relate to each other as individuals and as organisations. It comes down to that, and then when we start dealing with anti-racism, it then challenges us about sexism, about ageism, about other kinds of prejudices that we have. So it becomes a window into opening out in our relationships between male and female, between young and older people, as well as those cultural things that we have to face. So it's been really important for our board to do that and to model that and to keep modelling that for our organisations and for Western Sydney.
Mm.